Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight Dr. Reeves, who is a medievalist. You're the middle person, is that right? From between the ancient and the present world?
Yes, I'm a scholar of the Middle Ages,
right,
European Middle Ages.
Right, that's good. And so we were discussing a little bit in our break here about your background. And where did you grow up? Where was your home?
I'm from Angleton, Texas, small town about 40 some odd miles south of Houston.
Okay, and then you went to school in Texas and then to Toronto? Or?
Right, but between that, there was 5 years in the Marine Corps as a Korean linguist.
Oh, well, let's discuss that. You were a Semper Fi there. You were in the U.S. Marines?
Yes, sir.
How did you find the experience?
Well, I was super lucky because I was in from 1994 to 1999, which you might remember as probably the only 5 years of peace we've had in the last 30 years.
Did you go through Paris Island?
I went to MCRD San Diego.
Oh, on the other side.
I was a Hollywood Marine.
On the other side there, and they call them Hollywood Marines.
Yeah, but I was west of the river.
Were the gunny sergeants pleasant? Were they father figures? I got a nice wife there.
Not unlike father figures, but bad father.
Bad father figures. Well, and then you go to language school in Monterey, or where did you?
Yes, I did 63 weeks at the Defense Language Institute learning Korean, then did some time learning all of the classified stuff, and then another 3 years in Fleet Marine Force Pacific. And then I got out and I did my undergrad.
And you learned Korean. Comments about that exercise? I mean, is it a tonal language?
No.
It's not tonal?
No. Otherwise, I would have failed out very quickly.
Right. So that was pretty interesting. And so presumably, you're sort of watching what the other guys are up to there. North Korea, you're watching those guys.
Yeah, you keep an eye on the bad guys.
And I won't ask for any national secrets, but they were pretty bad guys, were they not? I mean, the other.
Oh yeah, DPRK is awful.
They're pretty bad up there, right? They're pretty bad guys. Well, that must have been a pretty stimulating experience for you.
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, there wasn't a lot of actual work. Most of what I did was when I was in Fleet Marine Force was training. Yes. You know, you get around, you get in a support team, you kind of practice how you would do the classified stuff if the balloon ever went up. But I only spent a few months.
Now,
actually.
Did you have to keep your weapon with you, and did you shoot it and go out episodically and keep your marksmanship skills?
I have.
That's rather good. I like that.
I have many memories of handing my rifle to the guy in the armory, having him get a Q-tip, find a spot in that rifle that I was sure I had cleaned.
Yep. Was that bad?
Putting that Q-tip in and then showing me the carbon, and I went right back and started cleaning again.
It must have been quite an adventure for you. And you must have scored well on some tests, in my opinion, to go into the. Did you have a language test?
Oh yeah, I took. There's a test they have called the D-Lab, Defense Language Aptitude Battery, and what it does is it tests your ability to learn the grammar rules of a foreign language. So you basically take this test and you get an arbitrarily made up foreign language. Really? And they say, here are the grammar rules for this language, go, translate
really? Wow, it sounds pretty rough.
Right, but that ideally shows that you can then learn a foreign language.
So did all the Marines take this test?
Oh no, you basically, if you want to be a translator, which I did because I'm a big old nerd and I think language learning is fun.
Yes.
You go in.
Did you explain this to the gunny sergeant?
I explained this to my recruiter, and he's like, "Okay, we're going to take the D-Lab." Yes. And I did well enough on the D-Lab that I got to go to DLI, Defense Language Institute, learn Korean, and because I've been out now for 99, that's been 28 years. I've been out for like 28 years.
Do you still follow Korean, read Korean magazines? Or
I don't. My Korean has degenerated to, where's the washroom? Do you speak English?
You like some noodles? I like these special noodles.
Naengmyeon, kata 주십시오.
That's good.
Can I please have some cold noodles? Mi국 사람입니다. Jongo Hamnika, do you speak English?
That's pretty good. Oh, well, I'm impressed. So then you went to undergraduate school. Which one was that?
UT Austin.
UT, that's the big place there, right?
Yeah, there is a really good research university attached to the Longhorn football team. So.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, that's a little.
Yeah, the Longhorns have a good research university.
What do they
say?
Attached. Spear them.
Hook them.
Hook them
horns.
Okay, I got it. All right,
Yeah.
little ferocity. And then what did you major in there?
History and English.
Good. And then you decided to do medieval history in Toronto.
Yeah, University of Toronto. Medieval Studies, which is
and
a
that's
bit more
interdisciplinary. That's a real world center, is it not? That's
it is.
Is that almost numero uno?
That is one of the best. If you want to get a medieval studies PhD, it's one of the best places to do it in North America, if not the world, especially in the English-speaking world. There's Toronto, there's Notre Dame, there's your Oxbridge schools, but yeah,
right.
U of T is one of your better places to do that.
Great. And so you've pursued this for your academic career, and you're here in Georgia, is that right?
Yes.
And you're in, let's see, where do you teach?
I teach at Middle Georgia State University.
Middle Georgia State University. Middle's, yes. Okay, well, good. I like the name. I do. I like it. Okay. And so we've had discussions about having been through that journey through your past. We've had discussions about the medieval world, and maybe I'll ask this question about why one would go into a monastery, and what was the impulse, and was that some special gift that the medieval world gave to us, and that since universities presumably flower out of that? Comments about that?
Oh gosh, medieval monasticism. This was something I was very sad to learn in grad school, is that most people going into medieval monasteries, all the way up until the late Middle Ages, came from the ranks of the nobility.
Yes.
Because one of the things that modern Christianities really kind of emphasize, and this is Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, modern Christianities, we have a strong sense of vocation.
Yes.
Someone is going to be a priest,
right.
Someone is going to be a minister, pastor.
Right.
They do it because they have a sense of vocation.
Yes.
And when you approach the Middle Ages, you got to just throw all that into the trash. You go into clergy, you go into monasticism, you go into that sort of thing generally because it's what you do because of your family, your social group.
Or younger son, would they do that? Or
I mean, younger sons is the cliche, but it's kind of true.
Yes.
Generally among nobility, if you're a younger son, you're going to go into the church. And if you join a monastery, yeah, usually it's because you have nobility who want to have good relations with a monastery. Now, this isn't always true.
Right.
There are some people who join a monastery or a nunnery out of personal devotion. But gosh darn, like 7 or 8 times out of 10, you're going into the church because it's family. Same thing about being a priest. Why are you going to be a priest in the Middle Ages? Sure, you might have a sense of vocation, but realistically, it's because someone in your family is owed a favor, and the person who owes your family a favor has the right to suggest the candidate for priest to a certain parish.
Yes.
And you need a living.
Right.
And you become the priest.
Yes.
This doesn't mean that monks or priests are not devout. And this is another thing about pre-modern society.
Yes.
Pre-modern society, what do we think of? We think very much in terms of the individual. Whether it's in terms of individual religion. Baptist Christianity says, "Are you saved?"
Yes.
And the thing about pre-modern society is it's just not about the individual.
Yes.
And the thing that means, though, is you can become a churchman purely because of family reasons, but because you are inhabiting this social role, you end up being the best churchman you can be because that's what a churchman does.
Yes.
Like Becket. Thomas Becket. Famous story of Thomas Becket,
Right, yes.
Archbishop of Canterbury.
Yes, and King Henry.
Yes. I always use that because you seem like a person who paid attention in Western Civ back when you were taking it many years ago. But, Henry II, he appointed Becket to be his Archbishop of Canterbury because he was a friend and an ally.
Yes. He was a drinking buddy,
Yeah,
supposedly.
exactly. But what does Becket do? Once he's Archbishop, he figures that, well, I'm bishop. I am going to rise to the role of bishop because this is what a bishop does.
Yes.
And so he does. And a lot of Becket's fellow clergy thought that he was pushing the issue way too hard.
Yes.
But yeah, you become a priest or a clergyman, and then you fill the role. You rise to the role. The role makes you. Does that make sense?
Yes. The hour bringeth forth the man. Presumably,
Yeah.
presumably the role does. Let's see. Bede. Wrote the history of the English Church in the 8th century.
Yes.
I've read that, and I'm struck by the mythology. Mythology might be the way he interprets the world. This and causality seems to be a little blurred. This is what happened, and there's the triumph of, I guess you could say, faith or perceived. What's really happening here is being filtered through Christian dogma.
Right.
About this explains what it's quite a book there. I think that's and he, to go back to your point, I think he mentioned that the nobility were sending their children to the priesthood, and they were doing the same thing that Bede was, focusing on I guess the devout life. And just to make a comment, we was going through the monasteries and the tranquility there. It could also be said they owned everything, and so did they have their own peasants that were sort of supporting them?
Oh, yes.
Since you're a student of peasanthood,
Oh, yes.
is one of your interests.
Monasteries owned lots of land that often had lots of serfs. And one of the things that depressed me mightily when I was in grad school and learned about this more often,
Yes.
because when I started grad school, very, very into monks.
Did you consider that as a?
Oh no,
Okay,
no,
okay.
I do not have the constitution to that vocation.
It's quite a tough thing to do.
Also, I'm Protestant, but
well,
but the thing
that's
is,
a small impediment there.
yes. But I remember learning in grad school that your monasteries were often not only landlords, but often were the more rapacious landlords.
Yes.
If you are a medieval peasant, you actually probably want to be the peasant whose land is owned by a layman rather than a monastery, because they're very, very good at profit maximization.
Yes.
Like you look at monastic chronicles.
Yes.
And most monastic chronicles, they are these records of how well a monk, the abbot of a monastery acquired more lands, gained more wealth for the monastery. Now, this is not to say that there were not men in these monasteries, women in these nunasteries who were extraordinarily devout people. But yeah, they owned peasants. They would have owned, or not owned peasants, because a serf is bound to the land. You don't own the serf, you own the land. But yeah, they would have owned land with serfs attached and been just very, very wealthy.
Well, now, you're moving a little more into the, I guess, the Renaissance or the High Renaissance, at least when in England, when the King Henry took all the monastery land and gave them to this, just disestablished the monasteries. It strikes me, I don't know if you've seen this on television, Downton Abbey. I don't know, maybe you're familiar with that. But the idea is, sort of the theory in a way, was that this was a noble thing that helped all the little people. But that's beneath the surface. And then it was taken over by the secular lords who exploited it. And then, as the story goes along, finally, the situation reversed itself, and the abbey and all its wealth were being restored by the Labour Party to the people again. The relationship between the English aristocracy and the monasteries and what happened, you could say, was that wicked to have taken. Presumably, the monasteries were doing some good.
Oh gosh,
and then they were given to the supporters. They were sort of the Catholicism was, I guess, bought off, so to speak. If you got down to an abbey, you got a big.
Yeah. Oh, that's.
I
the
mean,
thing.
you would certainly go with a. Yeah, I'm a Protestant now.
The dissolution was the dissolution of the monasteries was an absolute bonanza for the gentry.
Yes.
I mean, the 15 and 1600s is when the gentry really solidify their place as the rulers of England, that they don't, even with the English Civil War, they don't really lose that role, gosh darn, until the 20th century.
Yes, and then is a relationship, just to speak about that, the Europeans from the British Isles that came to North America, in some ways maybe they'd been injured by the dissolution of the monasteries and the development of this. There's always been a class system, and maybe that really put the gentry on steroids, so to speak, and maybe into that encourage the tension that existed between America and Britain. In some ways, I mean, you can make a case the preponderant number of European of British descent or Irish descent, as far as that goes, could be called peasants that came here or close to it. I mean, occasionally a younger son would show up, but in some ways that event played itself out in history in a way that the refugees from the British social arrangements came to North America and then flowered into something else, and ultimately that social tension played itself out with a lot of nuances to it in the Revolutionary War. I mean, I'm pushing that. Any comments on that?
I think that's a good take. I mean, because one of the huge things about the U.S., and again, we're a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, is that fundamentally a lot of our white founding populations, not the people who came here against their will from Africa,
right?
But the white founding populations tended to come. Yeah, they didn't come. There were people looking to make a quick buck. There were people looking to rise socially, and so you see this founding population that is fundamentally a lot more egalitarian. And that, I think, is a big factor driving a lot of the American mentality even today. Is that who do you have settling? It's the established gentry, they stay in the motherland.
Yes.
Who comes over here?
It would be a hell of a trip, would it not?
Yeah. Now again, this is
a very unpleasant trip, I would think.
Now they very quick, especially like here in the South. The planter class very quickly establishes itself as this sort of. They very much look across the ocean and want to establish themselves as a new gentry class.
And indeed, I mean, isn't that sort of the funny kind of thing about if you want, I don't know if you could say there's an American gentry. I don't know, only with difficulty could you say that. It's really, it's a really pretty middle class country. I mean, in general, I mean, there may be some people that would disagree with that, but if you compare the regular Americanos floating around in their worldview and their exceptionalism with this sort of established European nobility, I think it is different. I mean people are sort of, there's like Oklahoma. I'm no whatever the song in there. I'm no better than I'm no better than you or whatever it is.
I know the one you're talking about.
You're no better, but I'm sure as hell. You're no better than I am.
Right. The only song I remember from that is the singing cowboy in the first song, talking about it's a beautiful day in the corners of High.
I guess what I'm getting into, you'd mentioned earlier about the funny relationships that take place in the medieval world. Is the child is the father, so to speak. But quote that. But the idea is that a lot of our the nuances of our contemporary world have their origins there, and maybe the dissolution of the monasteries played and the English class system as it came down from the medieval times, the idea of peasanthood, that whole extension of rights, this and that, the thuggery of the I guess of the nobility, to use that word, or the white company, all that stuff that's out there. But they're sort of bad people. They were running the things. And in America, at least in the South, one of the issues with the whole story was slavery and the attractiveness of it to the planter class must have been the model that had been put before them as being serfs in Cornwall or whatever.
Oh God. Well, I mean,
is that I mean, in other words, the relation, the
There's
South as opposed to, in a way, Boston.
Well, there's a couple of
Charleston as opposed to Boston.
Yeah, there's a couple of different things going on in the Caribbean and the South. Because, Caribbean and the South are the same kind, up until the Revolution. Yes. Caribbean and the South are basically the same sort of system. And yeah, what they're doing is these are Reeves. These are people who want to rise to that gentry level.
Right, and they fashion themselves after the,
yeah.
Sort of like the Gone with the Wind story, which was the idea, which is the British, whatever it is, I don't know who played, I don't know the character, Vivian Leigh.
Oh gosh,
so
yeah.
She was a British, and the whole accent story, the whole kind of.
Well, there's a couple of things going on.
It's a very difficult push to actually do that.
Yeah, there's a couple of things
going on. Yes.
A couple of things going on here in the American South. So first off, in the 17th and 18th centuries, you have these people who, again, aspire to gentry status. But then, in the 19th century, Sir Walter Scott writes Ivanhoe. And the thing about Sir Walter Scott and Ivanhoe is the planter class especially eats it with a big old spoon. And so,
yes.
And so you get this system where, 17th, 18th century, 1600s, 1700s, your gentry class, or your planter class is thinking of aspiring to gentry status. Then Ivanhoe hits.
Yes.
And every planter and his brother thinks of himself as not gentry, but as knightly, as leapfrogging back over those centuries. If I remember correctly, there's a line where Mark Twain remarks that Sir Walter Scott was responsible for the American Civil War. And, he's kind of not wrong because, again, you had that sort of...
Was his ghost there in Charleston when the cannon was fired on? But I mean, if there's something with the whole American history, we're going back to the impact of medieval worlds, but as it was transmitted into this boiling cauldron of new possibilities in North America. But the South really had at least in my view, an extraordinary sense of honor. That it was non-rational in a lot of ways. You're going to break away, you're going to fight a war, you're going to do this, you're going to do that.
Yeah, and I mean,
it was not a reason. There was no real reason to do it, other than you felt the North had been insulting you in some ways.
Oh gosh, especially like Southern ideals of honor and masculinity and violence were already really diverging from the rest of the country. Again, even in the 1700s, like especially you look pre-Great Awakening, the gentry class in the American South, especially, which is what I know more about, they're pretty much, yes, they were theoretically Anglican, but before the Great Awakening, they were basically unchurched. Their ethos...
And unschooled.
Yeah. And so the gentry class, their ethos was one of, essentially hedonism, violence, honor. And this was not just the elites, but this kind of filtered out to the rest of, especially, your free Southerners, is this kind of ideal of both, honor maintained through violence, of this, level of hedonism, especially in terms of like drinking and gambling and other forms, but also, even things like, I want to talk more about hunting in America, but that might go further afield. But then so that's already really baked into your Southern elites, to your planter class. And then when they get a hold of Scott and Ivanhoe, it gets turbocharged because they think of this as, well, we're knightly. And so that then yeah, that becomes this just major thing just kind of hanging over the South, this knightly ideal. And again, it's almost a reconstructed knightly ideal, because by the 18th century, Middle Ages has been over for a while. But then what do you see? You see this kind of revivified idealization of the Middle Ages with people like Sir Walter Scott.
Well, I mean, I'll make a few comments. One of the things, actually, there's pretty ferocious events took place in the North as well. And the type of personalities that were, say, going to the Finger Lakes, they were shooting Indians, they were cheating the Indians out of their land, they're doing this, they're doing that. All, they were pretty rough customers there as well.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and so maybe the big deal was the sense of a bonded class.
Yeah,
and the race issue was tossed in there, but I would submit that the people on the other side of the Ohio River, they're floating around in western Pennsylvania, whatever, pretty ferocious.
Yeah.
Not so dissimilar, but
the frontier, especially the frontier. Yeah, you have that level of kind of violence as way of life.
Yes.
It's very much built into, not so much once, especially like New England and the Atlantic states are established as settled, by the 1700s. But once the frontier keeps pushing west, there's
a lot of ferocity that's there.
Yeah, that notion of violence as a way of life. And that leads into one of the more fascinating things that I find, and we're like running out of time, but one of the more fascinating things is you see in the American experience that idea of arms bearing related to freedom gets really quickly grafted onto the idea of whiteness. Because you've got black people, natives, the idea of them as arms bearers is really kind of like frightens people. And so the idea of arms bearing as a symbol of freedom really gets attached to whiteness. And again, this is something that I would love to talk about for much longer. And I'm not very good
just one little vignette, and then I think we have to wind up. But actually, growing up in Macon, Georgia, there's it's a well-known story that the schools were segregated by sex and race. And going to school at Lanier, there was all of the at least Caucasian males, young males in the town, were in a military unit where in junior ROTC, and they were arm bearing, and no one else, no other ethnic group had that responsibility. And indeed, to graduate, it was necessary that you could be a good sharpshooter, which that probably served some well in the Marines. I don't know if you had sharpshooting. You had to shoot the .22 and to get your high school diploma. But that aside, well, it's been a fascinating conversation. Dr. Reeves, we'll have to have you back again.
I'd love to be back.
Obviously a man of great intellect and erudition, and so thank you for your
just pretend to
time
know
with
things.
us. Thank you.
Thank you very much
Thanks
for
a lot.
having me.
Thank you. Thanks.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.